Hi guys, we are live and we are building an onboarding application with SQL Server and Microsoft PowerApps. And this is actually a series. If you look down in the video description below, you'll find a link to the whole playlist. We've had quite a few sessions. Now this is a little bit on the larger side, a more complex type of application where we're using an Azure SQL Server as a backend. And I like to build applications that could be used almost in any organization. So any organization, you might have an onboarding process for employees, but you could have an onboarding process for your customers or clients. So I feel like this is a good example of something to step through and become familiar with. And you know what? I'm going to share my screen and sort of show a little bit of a recap of what we've done so far. So here's the screen that we worked on last where we manage applications. Now, if you remember, the whole premise to this application is that we want to build software as a service. We want to build an app that we can resell and we can host the data in a SQL Server database. And in order to do this in the most flexible way that I would know how, I want to keep track of organizations, tenants, environments, and applications. Okay. So not only am I building this for my own organization, but anybody else who'd like to purchase this software as a service, your data could reside here in the same SQL Server database. And I don't want to display any type of real data as we're building the application in these YouTube videos, of course, right? But so right now we've got a good amount of test data, and we'll be adding more and more test data as we build onto this. And then when we're done with the project, then I can start working with real data just to avoid the chance of somebody's real data being displayed, of course. So Kurt, Elvis, how you guys doing today?
Doing good. Doing good.
Yeah. Every day's a Saturday, right?
Every day's Saturday.
Very cool. All right. So I do have some accelerator students in on as panelists, but if they don't show their video, I don't bring them on. And if they hide their video, I'll take that as an indication they don't want to be on, and I'd like to keep an eye on the public chat. Wow, there's a lot of activity out in the public chat. And good morning, all. I see a lot of hellos and good mornings. So very cool. All right, so let's get started here with the actual development that we'll do today. So I just wanted to lay the groundwork, do a little bit of review. So our database, we're keeping track of a lot of stuff. Now, for every individual user, we're going to track, these are mapping tables, and it's going to keep track of what users are associated with what organizations, tenants, environments, and applications that we could keep track of, okay? And that all associates with a user table, where we'll keep track of details for users. Okay, in fact, I'm going to try to hide this so we got more space to look at this. And one of the big things I want to do for an onboarding application is to have questions answered, or documents uploaded. So if we hire somebody new, we'll need information, some documents, some personal information, so we could do direct deposits, so on and so forth. And similarly, as we bring on new customers or clients, we might want to ask them questions like, hey, how did you hear from us initially? Did you see an advertisement? Did you just see me on YouTube? And we could have statistics based on that, some good metrics to run our business on based on this type of stuff. So any type of document that's uploaded, or even questions answered, we might have a good questionnaire for them to fill out. And we want it to be based on a requirement. So we have a one-to-many relationship between a requirement and document. So let's say new hire paperwork, that could be a requirement. And then they could end up uploading 5 different documents that makes up their new hire paperwork. So we do have other tables here. So if we go through this, we do have a question occurrence, which is an occurrence in which somebody answered a questionnaire. We could have a questionnaire interval. Let's say we've got something for them to fill out once a week, once a month, once a year. Okay, so that would be 3 different rows in this interval table. And then we have a questionnaire. So this could be annual check-in, And then this interval would be, it would say annual. So we'd have an associated interval that the application would be aware of and implement business logic based on that data. And then we have questions that are inside of questionnaires, and we'll have answers. Okay, we have question types like, is it a single line of text? Is it like an essay? Should they paste in a 12-page Word document that they've typed up? Or it could be a yes, no Boolean. It could be a numeric question type. Okay, or it could be a choice. So far, that's pretty much what we have here for users. We have user types, questionnaire. Now, of course, this is a mapping table between questionnaire types and user types. Okay, so we have quite a bit of database tables here. We got quite a bit going on. And if you want to see how we planned and designed this application, check out the I'd say the first 2 or 3 videos in this series where we sort of covered that aspect of building this application. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over here to PowerApps. And here on the home screen, if I go back home, this is sort of like a dashboard for a user. But even if I go back to the welcome screen, a welcome screen typically sometimes can be called a splash screen. It lets the user know, oh yeah, this is the application I was intending on going to, and gives them a few links to sort of go off of. So I'm going to rearrange our mini-me's here, and we'll see some links. We got go to dashboard, which is this home screen. Okay. So here we want to actually show requirements. Okay. So then based on the requirement, we could have tasks. So I believe I probably want to duplicate this because I'll have requirements on one side, and then I'll also have the questionnaires or things that need to happen on the other side. So I'll go ahead and copy and paste that. Now, if you've paid attention to how I do galleries in my applications, what you'll see is you'll have a header to the gallery, but those are all dynamically sized and positioned based on the gallery. So you see how that sort of moves with it. Okay. So here I'll call these, I'll call this requirements. And then we have a due date. And maybe I'll make this a little less wide. Very good. And we'll move these things around. Now, if I turn on my, I think I'm going to take off my overlay at the top so you guys can see more of what's going on. Okay.
Something that I think maybe it'd be good for you to mention, Darren, when you're talking about the dynamic sizing and positioning of these galleries and the headers of the galleries, is that you got to be careful if you're trying this at home. Be careful that you don't change when you're moving it. Make sure you move the gallery and don't move the header, because as soon as you move that header, PowerApps is going to put a hard coded XY value in there. You lose your whole positioning. So if you go through the trouble of creating that relative positioning, make sure that you do that. I've done that many times where I'll set it all up and get it all beautiful and it moves around and I'm moving the gallery and it's sliding things around. And then I screw up and say, well, let me just change the position of this header up here. Oh, it's all gone now. It's all gone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just make sure, because I don't know. I just felt like people might get messed up in that. So just just move the gallery. Yeah,
that's an excellent point, Kurt. Yeah, sometimes it took me a while to sort of figure that out. Yeah, whenever if you have something here in PowerApps and it's dynamically positioned with a formula, as soon as you start messing with the designer, it's gonna overwrite that with literal values. Would you say? Instead of dynamic values, static or dynamic.
Right. And the reason why you can get away with moving the gallery around and it doesn't change the positioning is because you're using the gallery's XY position in your header. Right. So that the XY position of your gallery is being literals. Their literals are being placed in wherever you're at the screen. But then it's processing all that formula information up there in your headers. So that's how you get away with that. Yeah. mean, you could do a whole live stream on that right there by itself.
Yeah.
Relative positioning. And really, that's really important, especially when you're dealing with responsive apps, you know.
Yeah, Kurt, you taught me a lot of this relative positioning. It was a Visual Basic class over 20 years ago, back in my day. And Kurt, one of our labs for your programming class was recreating the Windows Explorer. And I remember dynamically creating picture buttons based on how many drives were connected to the computer. And then we would dynamically create items based on folders. And we really did create our own little Windows Explorer.
It's pretty cool.
And I learned so much. The labs that you create, Kurt, are incredibly good. You've got a knack for creating labs that I've seen that's unlike no other instructor I've been around or trainer. Yeah, I'm gonna try to make you blush today, Kurt. And it's something I try to stress, but people don't realize it until they do your labs. And I'd sort of like to mention some of this cool stuff you're about to come up with. So you are currently coming out with some practical labs and exercises dealing with collections, right? Would you like to say anything about that and maybe get people excited about, maybe if they're thinking about signing up for the accelerator, the type of things that they might learn in the accelerator program?
Right. Well, when we get into collections, we're going to do all things collections. So we're going to take collections as far as we can take it. We're going to test the boundaries of all these collections, and within any topic that we talk about, right? We're going to go out there and stretch the boundaries and see what you can do, what you can't do. We're going to play around with it. So, right. I'm doing a practical lab that's dealing with charts, dealing with collections, dealing with statistics, so that, and the reason why I put statistics out there is because that really is going to test the boundaries of these collections and what we can do with them. Because we're going to treat collections like they're arrays, and Amber knows all about arrays now. And we're going to use it as with data. We're going to try to create 3-dimensional arrays with our collections. We're going to try to do
whoa. What's a 3-dimensional array? Hold on there. Stop the bus. Hold on. Beep, beep, beep. Back the truck up. What is a 3-dimensional array? Is that like a SQL Server cube? What is that?
Right. It's like a whole bunch of, yeah. So you're going to have depth within it. You got your everybody knows now, Amber, this could be a good test for you. What is an array, Amber? Can you tell me? I'm putting Amber on the spot here.
I know. He wasn't even showing his video and I brought him back on the show.
So an array is a list.
It's a list. Exactly.
Single column list.
Good stuff. Single column list. So when somebody says, hey, you need to array your data, you guys have heard that term, right? Array your data or array something. Put things, array just means listed. It just means listed, right? It's a list.
So you could use array like a verb.
Yeah. Array your data. Okay, so that would be a list. In statistics, that's what you have to do a lot. You have to array your data because our statistics is all about data. So then, what's a matrix, Amber?
A matrix is it has columns and rows.
Yep, a 2-dimensional array or a 3-dimensional or 4 or 5-dimensional array, right? So
yes.
So then you've got a 2-dimensional array. That's a matrix. Okay. So now a 3-dimensional array is a cubed matrix. So you have a left. So if you think about a list is just a values of top down. It could be a grocery list. It could be a list of test scores or whatever. So you have a list and it's just a single column. Well, then you think of a spreadsheet. Well, then that's a matrix. That's a 2-dimensional array. You have rows and columns. And then you have a 3-dimensional array. Would be like if you look at Excel. I like to use Excel as an example because it's just one that people see a lot. We use 3-dimensional arrays in Excel all the time because if you think about down the bottom of that, you have workbooks, right? So you have a rows and columns in Excel, and then you have workbook. The workbook would actually be the 3rd dimension. So we have different tables of 3-dimensional. So in our collection then, what we're going to be doing is we're in PowerApps, we're going to train PowerApps into carrying many tables within one collection. and also have many. So let's think about, let's say you had a table of student grades, and you would have the subject, you would have the test score. Well, then you would have subject and test scores for every student. You could carry that for each one within. You have a table of test scores you could have attached to students, and you would have a three-dimensional collection. So I don't know. I feel like I went too long into that, but
Kurt, there is somebody somewhere watching this video, either live or in a year from now. They're like, "Oh, he stopped talking. I wanted to know more about that."
Right. But then there's probably more people out there going, "It's way too early on a Saturday morning to be going into this." That's the depth that Kurt is going, and Nick is probably out there in England going, "Do you realize what time it is right now?"
I'm trying to think. It's probably 2 or 3 in the afternoon. He's probably doing better than we. He's probably already on a second cup of tea.
Yeah, this is probably his best time for us, because he's usually real early or real late for him, right? And for all those that are over there. Yeah. Data is king said something about, we were talking about the headers and losing our relative position on there, and he says that you can put a group, you can group the headers, and that's something I've never really tried to do. I guess
or use a container, right?
Right. You could do a container within that too. And that's, Nick says third coffee here. He's going. And then I guess when I came into PowerApps, containers were already there before, like when you guys started. I'm still relatively new. So containers were already here, and I never really used groups. So I never tested that theory. So you could be totally right in that. Data's king. I've never done it. So, yeah.
So Scott says, excellent review. I haven't heard that explanation about array, matrix, etc. for nearly 40 years.
Isn't that great?
That's what I like about Kurt. He's older than dirt, and he's going to bring up things that have been forgotten. And if he has forgotten it, I'll remember and bring it up. And then,
yeah. Well, thank you for that, Scott. It makes me feel a little better. But it's funny how things change, right? But everything stays the same. Isn't that interesting how it works? And programming changes constantly, but yet it never does. We're still doing the same thing. An if condition is still an if condition. An array is still an array. A matrix is still a matrix. But yet the technology changes, and sometimes we lose that fact. But if we can just stay with the basics, we can go right through it. And that's kind of what you've done, Darren. You learned the basics at the very fundamental level, and you learned it very well. And you've taken that, and with everything that's changed, all the ebbs and flows. I mean, think about it. We've gone from desktop applications to connecting to a 3Com or a Novell server, to where we're dealing with shared stuff, to a big cloud out there. And then we're dealing with, we got to deal with front end stuff. Oh, and then we got to deal with back end stuff. And then we got to deal with all the middle stuff. And now we're going back now to all these different areas, and we're back on our desktop now. Think about it. Desktops are super fast now, crazy faster than they were back in the 90s. But yet now we're bottlenecking at the cloud level, right? So we used to wait for compile time to compile our programs on a desktop. We used to wait. I used to push my button to go compile and go play basketball with my kids. But then and come back, 40 minutes later, and hopefully it worked. Now you go push the button and you got to wait for 40 minutes for Microsoft time, so to get through.
Well, the good thing about the cloud is you think it would, like, the beauty of the cloud is that you could always scale it, like throw more resource if you could afford it, throw more resources at it. Yeah. But with the Power Platform, sometimes you're still waiting on, But
with all that technology, we're still dependent on that one ISP provider, right? That one provider. How fast is your provider? If you have a local provider not giving you the gigs that you need, doesn't matter what you got out there, right?
It's half fast.
Yeah, it's half fast. Yeah, exactly right. It's just amazing how it works. But so I guess I said all that to say things change, but yet they don't change.
Yeah, absolutely. So while we've been talking here, I've just been working on this screen. I want to create a screen that will manage requirements. Now, Amber, Kurt, is it clear in your mind what I mean by requirements? I know that I talked a little bit while we were talking about the ERD diagram, but this is an onboarding application. Yes, no, maybe so.
I didn't understand the question. I'm sorry.
My internet just lagged.
Yeah.
It is lagging right now.
So I
Could
want
you
to
repeat yourself?
build. I want to build a management screen for all the requirements. Okay. Now, when I say requirements, I'm not talking about like, hey, we're a software developer. We need requirements to build the app. This is so weird in software development. Sometimes a word, like even application, like in construction, you could use the word application. Oh, the application of the hammer is to, hit a nail into a block of wood. That's the application of the hammer or the nail, right? And in this case, requirements. What I'm talking about is if I'm asking, let's say, a new employee, a new client to upload documents or to answer questions, I'm specifying, hey, this is a requirement. We need you to do this. I'm like asking them or demanding that they do something in order to move to the next stage, So I'd like the screen to manage the requirements that we want to specify. So over here in the ERD diagram, I do have a requirement. So if they upload their ID and other pieces of data, that will be tied to a requirement. But I also want to have questionnaires that are tied to a requirement as well. So there's a one-to-many relationship here. And I'm keeping an eye on the comments here. So Scott, let's see what Scott said here. Great point. Order of operations is important when planning and executing development. That is back-end development, front-end development, etc. And then we have Ven. I know it's out of your scope, but I have a question. I have an Excel with 30,000 rows. I'm using it for my project IDs. I know there's a limit for it. How do I handle them? I'd recommend getting that into Dataverse or SQL Server, and don't even think about putting that in SharePoint. That's what I would recommend. 30,000. That may not sound a lot for a lot of us database guys out there, but been out for a while. What is a lot of data? Oh, anything more than 10,000 rows. And somebody will look at that guy. I'm like, what are you talking about? I got millions of rows over here. I got hundreds of thousands of rows. And that guy looks at him like, I got millions of rows. And you know what I mean?
I don't want to look at any more than 10 rows. So I get it.
Right.
I mean, 30,000 rows is a lot, but I only want to look at 10. So yeah, I like the idea of putting that Excel spreadsheet. Get out of Excel spreadsheet. That's what we have to do. Number one, right away, and put that into like a Dataverse or a SharePoint, and then we can control how many rows that we're working with at a time. You're holding 30,000, but you're never looking at them. So you're not looking at 30,000 not at once. So yeah, get that into a manageable place where you don't have to look at all that.
Now here's the question, Kurt. Let's say we put that in a Dataverse SQL Server. We got 30,000. And Vin says here, I'm using it for project IDs. Maybe it's a single column.
Yeah.
Or maybe it just has 2 or 3. So it's not a lot. It's not really wide data. It's just a lot of records, right?
A lot of records. Yeah.
Now what happens? Now I'm thinking to myself, let's say we needed to update that in Dataverse. What's the best way of doing it? Well, we could drop over a button in our PowerApps and say, oh, for all, everything that's in here, and we'll just loop. Do you know how long that would take? That would take a long time. 30,000, and you can only do 2,000 at once, right? Because you got a 2,000 record limit.
Sure.
Within PowerApps. So PowerApps wouldn't be the best place to do that. So you think, oh, well, I'll do a Power Automate. Well, I worked with a large corporation once, and they like to hire these outside firms to sort of jump in and like, oh yeah, we're the experts. We're just going to come in here and do this application for you guys. And, we give them hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it took 6 hours to run a report. And it's like, what are you guys doing? And Microsoft had to be called in to figure out, who's in the wrong. Did they design it wrong, or does the Power Platform not able to handle a lot of data? And what I'm going to suggest is if you have a lot of data, now the Dataverse has been designed for the Power Platform. Okay. There's less API calls that have to happen in order to talk to Dataverse. Very few. And SQL Server is my favorite data source, but there's actually quite a few APIs, especially if you have an on-premise SQL Server. You got to go through a data gateway and everything. But here's the beauty. Here's the beauty of SQL Server. I'm going to sell you guys on SQL Server right here, right now. There is something called a stored procedure. A stored procedure is an object that you can create within your database in SQL Server. Okay. Now that stored procedure. Now let's think, Kurt, and I'm not looking for anything fancy. Just so don't read too much into this. What is a procedure? If you, I'm just like, oh, Kurt's a programmer. Kurt, what is a procedure? How would you answer that?
It's going to go out there and process some lines of code, and then it's going to go back. That's all. It's just going to go out there and do something. It's going to go do something. Could
you use a word? Now, this word has sort of gone on and taken a life of its own these days with social media. What about algorithm? Is algorithm the same thing as a procedure?
An algorithm is nothing but a bunch of code. It's just lines of code. It's just instructions. That's all it is.
Okay. So I remember when I was learning, first started trying to learn COBOL, and that was a disaster for me. But I took logic class, and I took all these classes before I finally found you, Kurt. You became my guru as soon as I met you. But I know when I was learning C, which was probably the first thing I did right after COBOL. Maybe I was taking the same time as COBOL, and you could create a function. And a function, it seemed like it's something that could return a value, didn't have to return a value, right?
It's supposed to.
It's supposed to? Okay.
Well, function always returns a value. That's the difference between a procedure and a function, right? Now, it might return null. It might return 0, but it's returning something.
Static void main.
Yeah. Well, now, C is an interesting thing. That's why the difference between Pascal and C is Pascal is very consistent, where it says functions have to return a value. You will always return a value. C says, look, we're just going to call procedures and functions the same thing. C is kind of like a shorthand Pascal, right? So you are going to return a void. You're right. In C, you're going to return a void, which means you return nothing. So you're right about that, Darren. In C.
Now, when you taught me Visual Basic, there is something called a sub. And what is sub short for? Do you remember back that far?
Yeah, it's a sub procedure. Yeah, it's a procedure.
And sometime you'll hear people call it a subroutine. So you have subs, and then you had functions in Visual Basic. Well, C, they were just called functions, and if it wasn't going to return a value, you'd put void in there, right?
Yeah. Now, where did the sub come from? That's since you're bringing up trivia stuff here.
Yeah.
Where did the sub come from? Do you know?
I would say what I just said, which is subroutine, sub procedure.
Right. So in Basic, back in the old days, way old days, you used to have a go to line numbers, and then we would have a go sub. So you would say go sub to some label out there called do this. Yeah. Go sub, do this. And it would go down there, it would jump all because back then the lines were like line 5, line 10, line 15. And so you would have to go and jump down to line 3000 to go do some sub procedure and then go back up to line 15, right? So that was the go sub. Yeah, it's kind of cool. Anyway,
that's interesting. Yeah,
we digress.
We do. I'm trying to recall where I was going with everything. Maybe it was some of the comments here. So here's a question by MEP. Is a method a procedure?
Yes.
What is a method, Kurt?
It's a procedure. Yeah.
Okay.
That's really
now
good.
Typically what I remember, what I see is in the context in which somebody uses method. This sort of goes into object-oriented programming, and this is sort of interesting for us to talk to, but it may not be interesting for every viewer that's viewing this. There might just be wanting to learn PowerApps. Well, it sort of is important, guys. Think about this. Microsoft has released something called named procedures or named formulas. We're going this direction, guys. Mm-hmm. Have you guys played around with that at all? It's amazing. So click on app. Okay, click on app. And instead of start screen or on start, we now have something called formulas. Now, do you see formulas here? I don't. Why don't I see formulas here? Probably because it's a new feature and I haven't enabled it yet, maybe. So I'll go over here to upcoming features and I'll type in named. Oh, formulas. I like that. I'm going to turn that on. It's a preview, which means it's coming out. You might as well get used to it. Preview. Now, if you're using anything over here on retired, you probably want to stop being used to using anything over in retired. Okay. And then we have experimental, which means they're trying things out. They want to get some feedback, and then if it's good, they'll move it over. They'll add features to it and take out the bugs and stuff and move it over to preview. So I want to get that enabled, and I'll go ahead and save that. Okay. So in order to answer this question that came up with, when I learned Visual Basic, I learned object-oriented concepts along with C++. So you'd have this, you create an object. Let's say you would create an object called customer, and an object would have properties, which are like little data types or variables that hang off the side of an object, right? And so those are properties. And then you have these things called methods, which are procedures, but those procedures are callable routines that you could call on an object. So that's what I would say. Yes, methods are procedures, but typically when I've seen the word method used, it's always a procedure on an object that you can call. Now, if you in C++ or even Visual Basic, if you mark a procedure as private, well, that's still a callable routine that you can call within your class that you're creating, that one file. It's not accessible outside that code block or that file. That outside. I'm trying to use words that that work. I'm looking at Kurt's face. He's just lighting up. He sees me doing this dance of trying to explain this.
It's just not easy, is it, man?
No, because this could end up being a 5-hour lecture about object-oriented.
You started this by asking me the question, what is it? And I'm thinking, okay, keep this without going down the object-oriented rabbit hole here. It's a procedure. But you're right. It's now, if you start opening that rabbit hole, that's a can of worms. And you know what, guys out there, sometimes we stumble and bumble through this thing, but you know what? You ought to try it once. It's not easy.
Yeah. Try. Yeah. So go live one day and just say, "Hey guys, I'm going to talk about X," and then get some people to come in, and you'll find it's not as easy as maybe what it looks.
Yeah.
But MVP says yes. Java method specifically I had in mind. Yeah. So Java is object oriented. So Java and C# are very similar.
So back when I was teaching you guys in Visual Basic, I used to use this thing. A method is the add. So think about an English class, right? Where we have nouns, right? So you have adjectives. That would be a property. It describes the thing that you're working with. Like let's say like a text input box. Okay, the color would be a property, and then a method would be the on select. The on select would be a method. Because it's the action behind what that property can do. It explains what that property can do, right? Or I'm sorry, what that object can do. So that's what a method is. Really, it's a procedure because it tells you what that object can do, whatever. But it's tied to an object. You're right, Darren. It's tied to an object.
Yeah. And also,
Mark says, I think you were talking about how stored procedures are super useful. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
That's where we started.
My goodness. Oh, I got off the beaten path there, didn't I? Thank you, Mark. So, okay. Yeah. So let's say we've got 8 million rows. I think we were talking about 30,000, but let's say 8 million.
Yeah.
And you're working with Dataverse. How are you going to update that? Let's say we want to, I don't know, we need to sanitize the data. We need to add a new column and populate it based on some criteria. And there are 30 million rows or 30,000. Gee whiz, that's going to be, I'd have to sit and think about that. I'd probably have to export, update it, and then import it, to be honest. Now, if you had it in SQL Server, you could create a store procedure. And a lot of times these things are called sprocs. Now, these are not the clothing item that you put on your feet in the morning before you put your shoes on, right? I didn't say socks. I said sprocs, SPROCS, stored procedures. Now, these are procedures that are compiled within SQL Server, so they're going to be very fast. Kurt, can you tell us in a 20 or second, a 30 segment, what does compiled mean?
It just means taking it down to the machine level, or below the machine level, to the computer's level, to the language that it can understand.
Yeah.
Zeros and ones.
Yeah. So if I needed a procedure to happen on a bunch of data, I could write a store procedure that would work there with the SQL Server data, and it would happen very quickly. Okay, because it's there right all within SQL Server, and SQL Server has been designed. It's been out there for over 20 years, and it's Microsoft's premier database platform. In fact, when you have a Dataverse database, that's SQL Server underneath the scenes. You can actually connect to it with Microsoft's SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, and it will be read only at that point because it's really Dataverse, or Dataverse has a hold of it. But yeah, so that will be the most efficient way of dealing with tons of data. Put it in SQL Server, create a store procedure, and you can call it. You can pass parameters into it. Store procedure can return values. Now, here's $1 million question. Can you call a store procedure from PowerApps? Does anybody know the answer to this besides Kurt? Anybody? Bueller, Elvis, Amber, or anybody in the comments?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you can call it stored procedure.
Yeah. So would you bring it in as a data source like you do with the tables? So here's something that, you do hear about calling store procedures from PowerApps, but there's one little step in the middle that you have to bring in, and that's Power Automate. You can't call a store procedure directly from PowerApps. Maybe they might change that in the future. That would sort of be cool. But it's not that big of a deal to create a flow that will call it. So you can call those. So that really, you could do a lot of stuff with store procedures. Anything dealing with your data, you can manipulate the data, update it, delete it, insert, all kinds of really cool stuff. So if you had a lot of data, you put it in SQL Server, and you have a store procedure that would manipulate that data, and it would be very efficient at doing that. So I wanted to sort of get into all that and talk about, it just excites me, the fact that, there was a job I had to use a store procedure for everything. I could not use an insert, update, delete directly against a data source because there was a risk of SQL injection attacks, and everything had to be parameterized if I was going to update or insert data. And you had to put it in a store procedure, and the database administrators would lock it down so that you couldn't really mess with the data unless it was through a store procedure. So I had a lot of experience doing that. So when I hear that, I can use store procedures with a Power Platform, that excites me because I know what you can all do with it. So on this requirements table, I added this is active. Almost every table that we have in here, we have an is active. And I just want to make sure that we have a default value for this. Any new records will have a default value of true. Okay. And what I'm going to do is save that. Move this around a little bit. Okay. So now we have is active. Now I can go back over here and do a search for requirements. And as long as that completely did that save for me, and it looks like it has, I'll be able to refresh. Now, Elvis or Amber, do you hear a toddler outside my or in the background?
No.
If you do, let me know. Maybe
right.
my noise cancellation on my microphone is doing its job, which is good. Yeah, sometimes when my toddlers likes to come in and look at all my lights and my computer, and a lot of times I let them, but live streams aren't the best time for that. All right, so I added that is active, okay, and we've got this screen here. I'm going to move off of it for one moment and then come back in. So we'll update our little heading here at the top. So admin manage requirements. Now, I'd sort of like to have, looks like we got the ice wall here, northern wall. Where did SQL Server go? Here we go. So for requirement, what I'm thinking is a requirement should belong to an organization, a tenant, an environment, or an application. So what I might do is actually add some columns here that would allow us to integrate that with those. Okay, so I'm going to go in here and go into the standard. I'm going to add some here. Okay, so I'm going to say organization ID. We'll make that int. We'll say tenant ID int. We'll say environment ID int. And we'll say application ID int. Okay. And I'm going to hit save. Okay. I'm going to save all that. I'm going to bring up my PowerApps application here. So this this gallery here, I'm trying to look at the requirements here. Okay. And I think I might want to add a drop down for each of those three things. Okay. So let me go find some drop downs that I have on another screen. Go into the developer screen and click over for the users. We have that. Yeah. I'm gonna out of here. I don't need all this debug stuff. So I copy all these things here. Hit Control C. And I will go over to Manage Requirements. And right now this is looking at environment. I think I'm going to take that out for a moment. Okay. I'll paste these guys in. Here's a question for you, Kurt. What are all the purple squares around the screen?
Kurt is muted. Kurt is muted.
Sorry, I don't know.
Do
That is for some
Alignment.
those purple. I'm trying to think of something really smart to say. So, and nothing's happening. So
I don't know, Darren. What are they?
I don't know. So what it is it's for these people who are extremely particular about their user interfaces, and it allows them to be pixel perfect as much as PowerApps will allow.
Ooh.
And and that's
That's really cool.
I'm trying to do this without digressing too much, but I just think that it's a pretty good idea. It's pretty neat. I think it's really great. I used to, and I just want to say, I got to say this. When it comes to user interfaces, I was always the guy. Of course, I came from a day when computers couldn't do a whole lot of user interface, right? So it was just all nothing but green letters and black background. So I didn't put a lot into that. And I'm the guy that comes from the engineering type background where I worry more about the way the machine works than the way the machine looks. So I was always poo-pooing Darren on his user interfaces. And Darren puts a lot into that user interface. And we've argued back and forth over the years over this.
No.
And he's right about something though. And I hate it because when he's right, he's really right. He's not right all the time, but when he's right, he's really right. And that is that, when you're working with those interfaces, that first impression is important, man. You might have a Maserati engine in there, this thing that just goes crazy fast. But if it looks like a jalopy, then people aren't going to look at it. They're not going to give it a chance. Yeah. I might have it might look like a jalopy, but I might have a rocket ship in there. And there's a lot of people that aren't going to do it. And what is the number one rule, Darren? What's the number one rule on what makes a good program?
Are people using it?
Are people using it? And so if people aren't looking at it in the first impression, then they're not using your program. And you might have a great program, but your program is only worth a darn if people are using it. So, you know, there's a lot to be said about the user interface. You know, I think they're both very important. Of course, you can have a user interface that doesn't work, and that doesn't help. But you know, you got to have both, right? So I said all that to say those purple things are kind of important, I think.
Well, thank you, Kurt. Yeah, I'm trying to remember where I got that from. Actually, it's funny because I learned things from you, Kurt, that you don't even intend on it teaching me. You used to talk about gutters.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, gutters. I'm like, oh, gutter. Okay, that made like a margin or something. And so I would take that and then I would build on it based on what you were trying to teach me, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sort of guides, a ruler. A lot of times applications will do that, have some type of a ruler.
Right. But you took those gutters to a whole new level.
Yeah. True.
And I'm not going to discount that at all. I think that's really good stuff.
I'm trying to create something that going to align the lefts of these guys and probably set their widths to not be so wide. I don't know if I can fit much in there, maybe 260. That would look better. And perhaps put these things over here. Sometimes you got to move things around, try them out, see if they look right in your eye. So I'm going to have requirements, but I want to have requirements based on, like different organizations could have different requirements or different tenants could have different requirements. And I want them to be able to not only filter based on that and see the requirements based on that filter, but also create ones that are specific for these individual data points. So that's what I'm trying to do. And these little blocks are my way of knowing that things are right where they should be. So for example, and these little squares, they're 20 by 20. At least in my apps, they don't have to be 20. You could actually have a variable set up in your app on start and put in a value of 20. And then later on, you could change it. And then if you've done everything right, you could have everything dynamically move around based on that gutter value. I love being strategic in my application design like that.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
So while you're doing that, something that came up in my mind yesterday was, when we implement variables in our applications, and we play around with it and test them, and sometimes we are like, okay, the variable is turned on now. I don't figure out how to turn it off, and you're just looking all over your application. Well, you can just drop in a button and put the variable in and turn it off over there, and then you can like stepwise go and figure out, okay, where is the variable going wrong, instead of just looking all over the application, because that thing is really actually hard. And you implement a variable and it's not working right, and you want to know where it's going wrong. Oof. Finding that variable again, like you might be using the variable in some visibility of certain screens, and the variable messes up. So how do you debug it? Well, when you can just pull a button on the screen and turn the variable off, and then it will help you debug.
I've done that many times, by the way. Having this little debug feature allows you to turn it on and off really easily. I had a user, and I made him a test user so he could see that little button. He goes, I feel like I've got superpowers. And I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, nobody else has this power. I've got this little button I'll turn on. I see all kinds of cool, like he sees inside the matrix or something. He was like super excited about that. I thought that was interesting how he saw that. So we've got these things here. I'll probably be moving this around a little bit more. So I'm hoping that this all this cascading stuff is going to be working just fine here. So I should see all the tenants. So I got a question for you guys here. So we've got organization, then it goes to tenant, and then it goes to environment and application. Should this tenant be over in this spot? Because
Well,
typically we go from left to right, and then when we're done, we go down to the next line, right? What are you guys' thoughts of that?
so how do you want to go? You want to go from organization to environment next, or do you want to go from organization to tenant?
Yeah, so based on what the data is, this is the logical hierarchy. So in an organization, you have multiple tenants. In any one tenant, you can have multiple environments, and in any one environment, you can have multiple applications. So that's how it should go. And what I just did here, I positioned these organization, tenant, environments. And do you think that would be confusing for a user? Should it be going straight across and then down, or should
Yeah,
I?
straight across and down would
Yeah.
be better.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too.
So right now, the gallery that we have down below the drop downs, that's the requester table, I believe, over there that's going to be coming.
This gallery right down here.
Yes, in the
So,
database
yeah, what are you asking about? So this should be requirement.
or requirements,
Mhm.
and you added all the tables in the requirement table in the database, right?
In the database, I don't think we have any data for requirements. That's why I wanted to build a screen so we can start entering some test data. But right now we don't
I
have.
was looking at the IDs, the requester in the table. I was looking at the IDs. Did you match them up with other tables? Organization ID, tenant ID.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I just added these 4 records that would, and in fact, we should probably set these relationships up, right? So if I zoom out a little bit here. This is where a good size system with the ERD starts to get a lot of lines going all over the place, right? But if I pull this up here, okay, there's the organization, and it's gonna help me out with this. And I'm gonna zoom in on this so you guys can see this. Like, okay, so on the requirements table, looking at the right side, we've got organization ID, and that needs to point to the organization ID primary key. And almost always it's right on. So I'll hit escape. So that is true. We should have that. Sometimes I try to reposition these lines so they look a little less confusing. Maybe something like this would look good. Okay. And then I'll go down here and I'll go look at organization and tenant. So I'll drag this guy up here to the tenant. Okay. Then environment. And we'll get the last one, app ID. All right, I'll hit save up here. All right, looks like it did that. Okay, very good. Now I'm going to go back here and I'm going to make sure I move things around so it makes sense to a user. Okay, that looks good. And at first I was thinking I'll just have these drop downs cascade and positioned just going straight down, but it was going to take up like 60% of the height that I had to work with, and it didn't give me a lot of space for that gallery. So that's why I positioned these 4 things into 2 columns to give us more space. And sometimes you don't realize how everything's going to fit in there until you sort of mess around and sort of place things. Sometimes if you do a wireframe, it sort of helps to visualize. But in some cases, I sort of do my wireframing or my TLARD method. I'll use my TLARD instrument to see what looks right. as I'm sort of moving things around and working on the screen. Does everybody know what TLAR is?
It's very scientific. Very
Very
scientific.
scientific. Yeah. Something that Kurt introduced me to.
Highly
That looks
scientific.
about right.
That looks about right. The TLAR method. Highly scientific. We've all used it.
Yeah, Nick says, yeah, that should be moved. Rulers would be nice. Yeah, I just want to make sure we're keeping up with the comment. Yeah. Okay, very good. What are you guys thinking so far? Now, I need to be able to assign a requirement, and this is going to be requirement name, not application name. Move this around so you guys can see this better. Okay. So we have a requirement name, and then really we've got these 4 things that we need to be able to apply to this. So move these things down. And copy and paste that. And question is this a container? It's a rectangle. Okay, that's good. So we got the requirement name. I'm going to put this is active data point right here. And if you ever want to, let's say we got a text box here and you guys want to make this wider, okay? And you're like, okay, I'm going to grab one of these 2 little small things, and then you try to make it wider. And you're like, oops, I just changed the height. Well, yeah, you just messed up the height. Do you remember what the height was before? I don't remember, and so then you mess it up. So what I do, I'm going to hit undo. Hopefully undo works. A lot of times it does not work. If you want to have another circle, if you zoom in, look at that. We have another circle we can mess with. We don't mess with the height at all. We're just going to do the width there. So that's what I do a lot of times when I want to make something wider, is I'll zoom in a little bit so I get that extra circle.
Now, when you say a circle, you mean the selection handle, right?
Yeah.
A handle. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. There's an official word for that. Is there?
I don't know. I guess it's a selection handle, but I just didn't want
handle.
people to think the circle was somewhere else, but you were referring to that handle inside of there.
These little circles here that you can use to manipulate the size, positioning, all that stuff. Yeah,
that's pretty good. So out when you zoom out, you only see 2 of them, huh? Isn't that cool?
Yeah. Yeah, you zoom out, you only see 2. You zoom in, you get that 3rd one in there. I'm gonna move this over some. And whenever I design my interfaces, I like for them to pretty much take up all the space that's available there. So make it disabled in gray until the previous dropdown is populated. Yeah, you could do that. Yeah, Nick says, great point with zoom in. And MEP says, that way people will not be confused for sure. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is try to make all these a little bit bigger. Let's say 320. That's probably a little too much, maybe 310. Okay. And I think that might help us out there. And this would allow us to define a requirement and then assign it to specific things like this. Okay. Now we don't need an environment down here now. Now we might want to grab, for this, we've got a default value. and it's looking at these things here. So in this case, for environment, okay, I might need to go back on that. Go back to that in a few minutes. I'll address that right now. Okay, so whenever something doesn't look quite right, I'll bring open the debug mode and look at our, yeah. So at first it didn't look right. It looked like it was really close, but no, it's exactly 20 pixels there. Good. And right now we're sort of displaying them all, every single requirement, because in the filter I put a true here, which means I'm not filtering at all. Just every single row is given. So we don't have any records yet. But let's see what we have down here. Now this is probably has to do with our little delete pop-up. We'll mess with that later. For the save, when we save a record, what we need to be doing is working with requirement. Okay, so there we go, requirement. And you know what I think I might do so you guys can see this better is I'll zoom in on this. Okay. Good. So we have these variables are still good. Now for the defaults, we're going to paste that in there. And then we're going to be looking at this gallery over here. What's the name of this gallery? Well, let's go. Gallery environment listing. This should be gal var. Let's see. We're going to use that in gallery instead. Go back to the save button. Okay, that's been updated. Okay, so what is it complaining about? I'm going to hover over this red squiggly, and it says the specified column environment ID does not exist. Okay, that actually does exist. So I'm going to go over to the data source. I'm going to type in requirement and make sure we've got a good schema definition here within our PowerApps application.
Now, why do you have to do that, Darren? Why do you have to do that refresh there?
Yeah, if you ever add columns, remove columns, change something in the schema in the database, PowerApps doesn't know about it. It's just going to assume nothing ever changes. So you got to go over here and refresh that. So it goes and looks at that schema. Now, Kurt, what would you say? Because I'm using this word a lot. Schema. What's a schema when talking about databases?
I like to use schema. Another word is structures. Your data structures. The actual fields. You haven't got any data in those tables, but you have the definitions created. That's your structure. That's the structure that your data is going to go into. So I like to call it data structures, but it's another good word, schema. You know. Yeah.
And a lot of times when I look at an ERD diagram, sometimes I'll call it, oh, here's our schema. Some people call it, the ERD. Well, give me the data definition, which might be a Word document or Excel document that's got all the.
Right. Now, actually, if we wanted to be technical, the schema is exactly what you're looking at right there. That's your ERD diagram. And then the structure is actually the physical structures that you create inside of that. So, so the blueprint is your schema. And then the actual structures would be the fields, the setup of your database tables is your structures.
Yeah. And if you guys want to learn a little bit more about SQL Server, which who doesn't want to know more about SQL Server, guys?
I do.
Okay, we got a requirement here. I'm going to show you guys something really cool. Within SQL Server, what you can do is you right click almost on anything, script table as, create to a new query window. What's involved in creating something just like this table? Well, it's going to go out and generate. It's a code generator. This SQL Server Management Studio. Look at this. Create table requirement. Now, it's going to give me a red squiggly because there's already a requirement. I could put a number here. Maybe it would. Yeah, look at that. Now it doesn't have a problem with it. Because if I were to run that, I can't create another database object called requirement because something already out there exists. Okay. So here's all of our tables, and look, here's all the data types. There's the identity. So you don't have to right click on table and say new table and work with a designer. You could have a script like this. So if you have a dev environment, testing environment, and production, okay, as you're making new changes, as you're developing something, well, whenever you need to deploy to test or to production, they need the new schema changes, right? So sort of keep that in mind, where you might want to generate something like, okay, I added a new column. So how do I do that? How do I make that change across all my some people might have 5 or 6 different environments. You could, you could have dev, you could have testing, UAT, you could have staging. There's all kinds of stuff that you can create. So look at that. It just generated all this code in order to recreate that table as it is sitting there. This is all the code that you would have to run. And look, it creates the constraints for the primary key, and it's creating an index or a key, and it's clustered, which means it's really the physical. And this is what sort of got me down this rabbit trail, Kurt, is I think you said like the physical way in which it's structured. If a key or an index is clustered, I had to learn this for my SQL Server exams to become a MCDBA, a Microsoft Certified Database Administrator. A clustered index, you can only have one clustered index per table. That's because that is the physical order in which it's stored on the disk.
Yep, it's the physical index.
You create more indexes. Well, those would be non-clustered, but it's sort of like in a book. You have a table of contents. Well, that's sort of like an index. That's probably like a clustered index. It's really, the book goes from beginning to end in that order in which you see it in the table of contents, right?
Yeah. You
go back to the glossary, you go back to the index, you've got different types of indexes, and it'll give you a page number where you can find it. Okay, that's an example of a non-clustered index. So no extra charge, but people pay big money to know these things.
And those are the fastest indexes, right? Indices, those are the fastest ones.
The clustered ones?
Yeah. And then, of course, you've got a little bit less of the logic. They call those logical indexes. And you can have as many indices as you want, but there's only going to be one clustered, one physical. Yeah.
And think about so there's a lot of upside stab and tons of so if you do any type of a where clause, if you have a select statement, but inside of PowerApps, you've got the second parameter within your filter. And you're saying, give me back all my customers in the state of Florida. Do you have an index based on the state, a non-clustered index? Okay, if your query takes a long time to come back, well, you need to create an index. You're like, I'll create an index on everything. What's the downfall of that?
Space.
There you go, space. Now, what do you mean by space?
RAM. You're loading, when you load a table in, you're going to load all the indices in along with it, because it's got to be able to switch it.
So we got 30 million records out there, and we want to be able to slice and dice the data however we want. We want to be able to get lightning fast queries whenever we try to look at the data. So we put indexes on, or as Kurt would say, indices. Is that plural of index?
Yeah.
Indices.
Yeah.
And you want all your queries to be really fast, and you want to pull from all kinds of different ways. Well, what happens is you could have, I don't know, let's say we got 10 gigs of data out there, and then you start putting all these indices or indexes on all these on, and instead of being 10 gigs, we could blow it up to a good 30, 40 gigs, because it has to have all this stuff indexed, which takes up data. Absolutely.
There was another thing I wanted to. So there was a question actually, because I didn't know about SQL Server. See, this is all terminology from back in the dark ages. I mean, all these things, none of this has changed. Nothing. I used to use the same stuff in DBase 3, DBase 4, Sybase, Oracle. All this, they all do the same thing. But there was something that you said that makes me think, So will SQL Server recognize an index that you have created, a logical index that you have created out there? Like, let's say if I've got my clustered indexes on the ID, but if I have a index based on the last name and first name, and I do a where clause out there in PowerApps, last name, first name, is it going to recognize that and go find the index for that it has a logical index for that?
That is the epitome of the importance of delegation. And delegation is a word that you hear in PowerApps, but think about what delegation actually is. As a business owner, I am swamped and flooded with all kinds of stuff. I feel like I'm the only person I can do. I need to delegate these things off to other people that would allow me to scale a little more, So, well, looks like Freddie's on. Hey, Freddie.
Hey, Freddie.
Yeah. So Freddie's somebody that
Avocados are great.
Absolutely. My life loves avocado. So Freddie's the avocado farmer.
Yeah.
Very interesting guy to talk to, by the way.
Man, it'd be an interesting guy to talk to.
And so Freddie, as a business owner, knows about, he says he's at the farm. Freddie knows about delegation. So within PowerApps, you've got thousands of records or millions of records you're trying to get at. And you're like, okay, I only want my customers in the state of Florida. And your delegation, you always want your queries to be delegated to the data source, right? So to answer your question, the answer to your question, Kurt, is no. It does not. PowerApps doesn't care about your indexes or indices because it's just telling the data source, hey, this is what I want. And for all we know, it actually constructs a select statement with a where clause. Okay?
But will SQL Server recognize it though?
So a data source like SQL Server or SharePoint or Dataverse, okay, either of those three, they'll get that query that comes in and says, okay, I am looking for just out of the customer's table, he wants just the people in the state of Florida, okay? The data sources will utilize those indexes or indices to perform that query. Now, if you don't have that,
that's what I was asking. See, in the old days, you would actually have to select the index yourself. So I could have 5 indices sitting out there, but I would have to make sure before I do that search, I would actually have to make sure that index is set. You know, so you're saying that no, SQL Server is going to go out there and optimize, and it's going to go find that.
It's up to the data source to execute on that query.
That's pretty slick, man. That's very slick. That makes me want to get into.
And keep in mind, you can create indexes in SharePoint, and also when you're in Dataverse, it's going to ask you, "Oh, do you want to be able to search on this?" That's its way of saying, "Hey, do you want this indexed?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. These are great questions, guys. Love it.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll have an org ID. So we'll grab that from this drop down. Good stuff. And Kurt and I have been talking. We want to create some workshops based on different topics.
You bet. That's the next big thing coming around the horizon. We're going to do focused workshops, and it is going to be amazing.
So I guess one thing I want to do, we can just throw out some ideas while you guys are watching me code in order to make this a little more interesting. Let's talk a little bit about this. One idea I have is, one workshop is, let's say you don't have your own tenant. Well, there's something out there called a developer tenant. Well, let's just have a workshop on a Tuesday afternoon, and and initially these might be just for the accelerator students, but we could have a workshop on how to create your own tenant. And with the word workshop in there, what I would expect is, if I attended that, is I'm actually going to do the work, right? So I'm going to be doing it on my screen, but I expect all of you to be doing it at the same time. And then as you guys are encountering issues or problems or errors or whatever, we'll stop and we'll help you, and we won't go along as a group until everybody is caught up. Is that sort of what you had in mind, Kurt? Or give me some other ideas you have there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of the whole thing. Look, the way I'm looking at this is like, I'm actually thinking maybe we could do you're going to have different workshops. They're going to have different lengths, obviously. Like I could see doing a weekend workshop or a 2 or 3 day workshop. And we actually have everybody's out there hands on, so we're all
that's how you learn.
That's how you learn. So then, we could say, okay, now we're going to go out there. I do a little spieling, maybe I do a little talking about it. And then we say, okay, Elvis, go out there and create this now. And then we're going to watch you create it, or at least you create it. And then we look at it. We say, what's right with it? What's wrong with it? And we all just kind of learn. I don't want to put anybody on the spot by saying, well, let's watch you do that, because when somebody's watching me type, I stutter typing. I stutter terrible typing when somebody's watching me type. It's just crazy how it works for me, man. I don't know what it is about that. I could talk in front of 1 million people, don't care. But if I have to type in front of one person, I can't do it.
Yeah, you think it'd be easy, But when you get up and everybody's watching, you'll find out. I've had a lot of people tell me that when in the accelerator calls, that we have a group calls, and I was like, all right, can you share your screen and we'll work with it? And they're like, I can't handle when everybody's watching. I'm like, yeah, it's hard, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because I deal with that sometimes.
You do really well with that. That's why I always say, no, Darren, you take it, because you do okay with that. And I'm okay with stuttering typing. I wasn't built to type in front of people. Okay, so I'm okay with that. But I think that that's kind of the direction I want to go with these isolated workshops, because working with accelerator students, and working even around people outside of that, but mostly with accelerator students, I learned the pain points of people, the general pain points of people. So then we could do workshops on those areas, because if the accelerator students are having those problems, then others are having those problems too, you know? So I just love the idea of having workshops in that. Yep. And it makes it an abbreviated thing, you know? It's like an abbreviated thing. Like, we're not here for the whole enchilada. We're here just to focus on this one little area. But we could do beginning level stuff too in that. We can have beginner level workshops where, you know, look how easy it is. You guys have seen my look how easy it is videos, hopefully. And if you look at those look how easy it is videos, maybe we could just break those down and do a workshop on it. I think people would get a lot out of doing that. I think it's great, you know.
And we could have prerequisites for the workshop. So here we're gonna do something in SQL Server. But have you done the first 3 things? Have you created an Azure account? Have you done this? Have you set it up? Because in the workshop, we're starting from this point and going to this point. We're not starting from the beginning every time. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then if you finish a workshop, you have pretty much a certificate saying, I know how to do this. I've done this from A to Z in a workshop, and I have this proficiency. And then somebody could print off their transcript. They're going to a job interview, or they're, you know, it's like, listen, you know, Darren Neese. Yeah, I know Darren Neese. Like, okay, well, I've done all of these things here, you know. I'm not saying that I'm all that well known or will be, but you know, I don't know.
You're going to be famous.
Definitely, you're going to be well known.
I tell my wife all the time, listen, I'm a big deal out on the internet. You don't know this, but people think I'm great. And she rolls her eyes at me. She knows the real me.
Yeah. So I also think that this would be I'm still thinking this thing through with the workshops, but I also think that the workshop would be good where you have a combination of video content that you can look at and a person in-person speaking. You know, I really like the idea of the in-person speaking over the video content, because I've got a series of video content out there, and I just don't know. Sometimes I feel that people, when they're looking at videos, they hear Kurt droning on and on and on about something. So they say, man, just shut up, Kurt. Just get to the point here. Get to the point. And so they hurry up and fast speed that thing. And then they miss something that I was really trying to say that's going to be really important, you know? And sometimes I like to challenge people in their listening skills to be able to pick out one little detail that I said in that whole thing that's going to change the way they design their program. And I can know who was listening and who wasn't based on that. And I like doing that. I like challenging people that way.
What'd you say?
Yeah, that's what happens. Darren listens to every third word I say. But I think that's important.
When I was a kid, we were so poor, we couldn't afford to pay attention.
You know, don't ever say that again. That's a terrible joke.
Sorry, I messed you up. I just saw that opportunity for my dad joke. I keep all my dad jokes in a database.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't even know where I was going anymore. But no, actually, you know, one of my biggest things, I remember when I was self-taught, and like a lot of you guys out there watching this thing, you guys are self-taught too, probably. Actually, we're all self-taught regardless if we go to school or not, right? But so I noticed though, when I went to the university, when I started going to college, I had a hard time. I would miss little things in the directions, you know, and it'd be just one little thing. And I actually had to train myself. And it would scare me because I would miss that. I'm like, oh, how did I miss that? You know, and it would be the difference in a letter grade, you know, oftentimes. So I trained myself, man, to be very, very particular and watch very literal within things. And I got very good at that. And boy, I didn't get tripped up too many times, you know, after that. But that's what I'm trying to train people to do when I'm teaching here too, is I want them to learn how to follow those directions, because when you're in a meeting and you're listening to Snuffy Smith, the CEO of some big company out there, talking about how they want this thing done. That little detail might be crazy important for you. You might do an entire application and forget that detail and say, oh, I got a lot of work to do now because I missed that, you know? Or you look like a goofy because you went in there thinking you had it all together, and you didn't have the main point that Snuffy Smith wanted, you know?
What's a goofy? I got to hear this one. What's a goofy?
So in my world, when somebody calls you a goofy, if you've got to tell people that you're not a goofy, you might be the goofy. Okay. A goofy is just somebody who just doesn't, you know, they're just goofy. They're just, they don't really have a whole lot of, they're just silly. They look silly. They are silly. They're just goofy.
Am I a goofy?
Depends
Are
on what day
are you talking about me, Kurt?
It depends on what day you're asking. But no, I'm just teasing. I'm teasing. You're never a goofy. But you just don't want to look like a goofy. That's what I always say. Don't look like I'm not goofy.
So what do you guys think about my interface here? Is it starting to shape up? What's that?
What do you think about the goofy term? I think that's a pretty good term.
I think it's funny. I think I'm a goofy. So Vincent,
don't be the goofy. That's the rule, right? Okay.
Vincent says the workshop would be amazing. Yeah. So I think Kurt, you came up with that idea, or I don't know, maybe I did. One of us did.
We're gonna say you did.
And I think it's an excellent idea. Right now we have 3 sort of like Q&A or group calls a week where we sort of call them office hours or whatever. But I think maybe we need to diverse a little bit and actually have maybe one of those to be like a little workshop or something. I don't know. Workshops may need to be longer in length because people are doing things that could get tripped up. So sometimes an hour may not be good enough for that.
I like the idea of workshops being multiple days of meeting, multiple hours, where we're actually spending like almost like a boot camp type thing, you know. And we can even have boot camp workshops, and we could have non-boot camp workshops where they're just really simple and quick, you know. But
I've actually registered right now for Microsoft boot camp and workshop. Basically, they're hosting it next Wednesday, I believe. So those guys are starting at 10 and finishing at 5 p.m. 10 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Yeah. I'm a little jealous of that. I feel like you're cheating on me, Amber. I feel
it's Power BI, so it's Power BI, not PowerApps.
I don't care.
Is it sort of like one of those app in a day type of thing? Of course, if it's Power BI, they wouldn't call it app in a day. They'd probably call it a report in a day.
Dashboard in a day or something.
Dashboard in a day. I don't like to badmouth Microsoft at all. I'm actually a Microsoft fan. You know,
I'm learning not to. Yeah.
Yeah. I did the app in a day when I was first trying to pick up PowerApps, and it was sometimes the Microsoft official curriculum is hit and miss. Sometimes it's really good, and saying that as a former Microsoft certified trainer, sometimes it's really good, and sometimes it just sort of misses the mark. And they've got a hard job to do. Let's say app in a day, where you're gonna learn the overview of the Power Platform or Power Apps in general in one day. And when they say one day, it might be just like 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. And it's hard to cover everything, you know, so they're trying to cover model-driven stuff as well as Canvas and a little bit of Dataverse. So it's hard to sort of create those, but I didn't feel like what I want to do is when I learn something, I want to start from scratch. I want to start fresh, new, blank canvas and learn one little thing at a time. Line upon line, precept upon precept. And I don't like to jump all over the place. All right, we're done with Canvas House. I'll just jump into, boy, I want to master this before I get into this, you know. But
well, that's the other side of that. The other side of that, Darren, is you can't. It's not even necessarily that they're failing in their teaching. It's that humanly, it's impossible to remember all that information in the matter of a weekend or a 3-hour session, right? That's what makes the accelerator program so good. Okay, because we're doing the same details of these workshops, but you guys are hearing some of this stuff repeating over and over and over and over again. You know, Amber, you're part of that accelerator program, and Elvis, you are too. And you guys hear me speaking the same time. Sometimes I sound like a broken record, you know, but you guys got that stuff in your head, man. You know, and that's what's important.
It has
Yep.
become a muscle memory, at a point
Yep.
it becomes a muscle memory. In the starting, I used to have a tough time understanding if statement, but like listening to videos and everything, it's just like a muscle memory now. And
Yep.
the same goes with is blank function. I was like,
Yep.
what is this use? What's the use of this function? And then later on when you're practicing it, it becomes a muscle memory. So
Yeah,
it takes time.
it takes time. It takes the amount, and you got to hear these things, and you don't even know what's really important to take away from these things.
Yeah.
So I like to have both. I want to have a combination of things that we're offering, the way we're doing things in Accelerator, but I also want to do stuff where we're actually hyper focused, laser focused on those certain areas.
You know what's going to happen if you're learning everything on a weekend? Mego is what's going to happen. Mego.
See, you learn Mego because I said Mego over and over and over again. Mego. He says, I've experienced Mego by listening to Kurt over and over. What is Mego?
Elvis, do you know what Mego is?
No, what's that?
It's a secret accelerator program language.
It is. It's a secret accelerator programming language. Mego.
Well put.
Mego. Let me zoom in here. My eyes are glazed over. Like you ever listen to somebody, they're talking, and whenever I worked with Kurt, I would go in his office, hey man, like what? Explain blah blah. And maybe you have a whiteboard and he'd talk, and I'm like,
Talk.
and he'd turn to me and say, right? And I'm like, uh-huh, yeah. Like, no, your eyes are glazed over, dude. And I'm like,
it's all gone. It's all gone. We've all experienced Mego. Yeah.
yeah,
That's right up there with TLAR.
that's right, TLAR. All right, so this is a test environment. I'm gonna make it active, save, and okay. So guys, this is the issue I'm coming up with. So this is an interesting concept to sort of go over and sort of figure out together, right? So I don't want these drop downs, the organization ID, tenant ID, environment ID, and an application ID to be required. So if they don't select any of these, this requirement could apply to anything and any organization, any environment, any app, so on and so forth. But if they select one, then it will be recorded. Now, whenever we patch something like an organization ID, it is expecting a number. And if we don't provide a number, then what I wanted to do is say, yeah, I don't want to give you anything. I just want to give you a blank or a null value. So this week in the Accelerator program, we talked about null values in regards to SQL Server. What exactly is a null? And it means nothing has been provided yet. It's not in a numeric type. It doesn't mean zero, because zero is actually a number that has been put in there. If you have a numeric type and it's null, then means nothing has been provided. So here I want to save some data, and what I want to do is, if something was selected, I want to get that number. Otherwise, I just want to give it a blank value. And I hit save, and I'm not getting an error, but I know it's erroring out because it's not actually inserting any of the data there. So has anybody encountered that issue before? And if you have, how did you deal with that? So I'm keeping an eye on the comments here. So we got bread and cheese. I remember bread and cheese from last Saturday. And so Kurt, did you hear my question of what I'm working with there?
No,
So we got an organization ID. It's a numeric value. But if they don't select something in that drop down, I sort of want to leave that null value alone. I don't want to put anything in there, right?
Yeah. Good stuff.
So how do we do that in PowerApps?
You just don't save it.
Okay, well, what if they do provide it? So I could comment out that line, but let's say they do. Well, then I do want that patched.
Should we set it up? set up an not is blank or use an if function?
Yeah, so if I look at this, in fact, let's just comment that out, okay? So we can do an if, right? Use an if function here. We'll say if, a comma there. If this value, what do we want to say, is blank?
Yeah. Okay, now I understand what you're saying. I misunderstood the question.
So I know if it's not is blank, then we want to give it that number.
Yeah.
All right, so I could do something like that.
So why do you want to keep that blank?
Because let's say I'm creating a requirement here as an admin within the application, and let's say I want this requirement to be a requirement for all the organizations, all the environments, all the tenants, all the apps. Then I just wouldn't select anything. I wouldn't select any of these guys, and so it would be like a global type of requirement.
Okay.
And so for them not to select anything means something. And I want to.
Would it be another more intuitive to just say all, to put an all selection in your drop down? And then if it's all, then it seems like it seems like it might be more intuitive. I don't know. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Okay, for the interface, I could go along with that in the interface and how the user's handling it. But over here in the database, if it's all, what do we put in here for this requirement? See this requirement table that's getting bigger here? We have 4 columns: org ID, tenant ID, environment ID, application ID. Mm-hmm. If they selected all, what ID should be in there? Or did I design my database? Did I not design it well?
So if you have it blank in your thing and you're leaving it blank, what IDs are going in there?
I want it to be nulls, right?
Everywhere.
But PowerApps doesn't have a null function; it has a blank function.
Okay.
So if I go in here to requirement, and within SQL Server Management Studio, I can go in and edit the top 200 rows and actually start inserting some data. I don't like to do that, but I could. Test 1, 2, 3. And I hit enter. It's going to take me to the next row. And it actually did that. So I'm going to re-execute this guy. Look at this. So I'm going to hit control 1 here. Here's our data. We have test 1, 2, 3. And there's null values for things like the org ID, the tenant ID, environment, and application ID. That's what I want to do. They didn't select one, or they said select all. I just want that null value just to sit there. How can you do this in PowerApps? I haven't spent a lot of time looking into how I could accomplish that, but sort of want to post it to you guys. As a PowerApps developer, this might come up. And you might like, well, I want that null value just to stay there as a null value. But because we have to list off all these columns that we want to save, we need a way of saying, hey, null value. Now in a language like C#, there is a keyword in C# called null, and there's also a type that you can tap into called DB null.
So Darren, okay, if you have a new record, its defaults, it's going to be a null. Those are all null values, right? Mm-hmm. So right. Can we not update those fields? Can we conditionally update the fields based on whether or not the stuff's empty or not? So if we don't update it, it'll just leave it null then, right? Mm-hmm. If we don't update that field.
Right.
So can we conditionally do that?
Sure. We could. Now look at what I have down here. This came off from one of our other screens where the GUID, okay, an app GUID, so every app within PowerApps has got a GUID. So if I go over here and I'll show you what I'm talking about just momentarily. And I'll look at my apps, and I'll click on the ellipsis, and I'll go to, where are my details? There's details. Click on details, and look at this. So there's GUIDs in here. There's a tenant ID. In fact, I'm going to zoom in on this so you guys can see it better here. See a little tenant ID there? Okay. We got source time. What else do we have over here?
You control one. That's pretty cool.
We got a hint. All right, so we got a lot of GUIDs going on. Okay. So I wanted to capture those things if we're working with applications, but there are some cases, let's say the user doesn't have it. Well, I don't want to make it required. If they have it, put it in. If you don't have it, then leave it blank. But if it's blank, I don't want to put an empty string in there because that's not really the GUID. I just want to say null because I don't have it. I don't want to provide a value. That's what I'd like to find out with PowerApps. How do you do that?
So
Has anybody come across that?
I guess that was my question to you is if you go up to the patch statement and you've got a field sitting up there that you want to conditionally put up there. So you got organization ID.
Yes.
And so well, you're kind of, okay. So can you just say, if this is a blank, update that organization ID. Otherwise just miss the organization ID in your update. I mean, you don't even have to put it, you would wrap that organization ID in an if, is what I'm saying. The ID field.
You almost want to put an if right here, huh?
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm
Yeah.
asking. Can we get away with that?
No.
Okay.
At least I've never seen that. If somebody has seen that, let me know. But this is my workaround. After you've done it, we could check to see, hey, was there anything selected in that drop down for tenant or organization, whatever? Okay. And you see what I do here? I did a trim on what was provided, and they could just type in a GUID. If the length was greater than 0, it means they put something in there. And in that case, I'm going to do a patch just on one column. Well, because we have 4, now we're going to have 4 different if statements for each of those 4 columns. And just to update one record, now we got to do like 5 or 6 different patch statements. Isn't that insane? Seems really inefficient. and at that point, I'm not happy about my code. I got a little Kurt on my shoulder, like, Darren, are you really?
Well, I'm not. I'm
really
still
happy
stuck
about
on.
what
I
you
think
did?
you can, Darren. I think you can wrap that field in an if condition.
Right.
And that you're going to show me. This is where he says, "No, grasshopper, you're not pebble snatching from me yet."
Guys, I used to be the grasshopper. You guys remember that old Kung Fu show?
It seems like I've done this. Yeah.
It seems like a what?
I'm just saying. It seems like I've done this before.
Okay.
And maybe I'm wrong, Darren. Maybe you're going to say no, Kurt. Yeah, the old Kung Fu show. I'm sorry I interrupted you in that.
So we're gonna do this. We're gonna learn something here. Experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. So I'm gonna say if this is what we're looking at. So I'm gonna cut that.
Put it up there.
Right.
Yeah.
And then as long as that's true, then we're gonna say org ID equals that. And we don't have an else block.
Nope. No else block.
Now, so there you go. Now look at all these errors we got. If does not exist, the specified column if. Everything that's expecting here, like this name, the organization, these are all column names. And it's saying, oh, there's no column called if.
So you have to put the condition on the other side of it. You have to address that field. You have to address that field.
If you want to patch the field, yes.
So what I've done, what I did is I separated in each. I had, oh boy. So my patch, I did it on the parameter level. So I was patching, and I don't know if that's going to be good because I only had like 1 or 2 fields to deal with. So I had 3 sets of curly brackets. That's how I got away around it. Yeah. So I had an if, right. So I had that if. So let's just imagine that was the only thing in our record, the only field in our record, right?
Right.
I would have a curly bracket for each condition. So like if I had 3 records in there, I would have right. And that worked. That's what I did. I'm looking at my code right now. And
So this is a patch statement with 1 column. And you said you did what?
Well, based on different conditions, if I had 3 fields on 1 record, and if a value, depending on what the value coming in was what I was, which field I was updating. I might only be doing field 1, or I might go to field 2, or I might go to field 3. And so I had each field wrapped up in a curly bracket, is what I did in that if condition.
So you're saying you could do an if here. Here's our condition if it's true. And then if it was false, then we'd have another curly bracket.
Yeah. Yep. That's how I did it.
And it worked?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. At least it seemed to. Of course, my code is defunct right now because I'm in the middle of doing some other stuff, but I actually had it working.
So if that's the case, we could test to see if there's anything that's selected in a control. If it is selected, then we actually do this. But what if it's not? We would have to, I mean, there's no way that I know of, and perhaps there is a way, of saying, hey, just put a null in that column. That's essentially what we need to know how to do, is how to put a null in the value.
Right. Yeah, that's not going to, for your case, that's not going to work. It doesn't matter. You might as well be doing the switch that you just had up there.
But if you're telling me that you could have an if for the 3rd parameter of a patch,
yeah,
and you could have the if on the outside. Now the curly brace signifies 1 record. So if I have a bunch of other columns, like we got the name and we have is active and notes, we need to update, we need to patch those columns too. So you see where it breaks down, and I think that you said that a few seconds ago. It's not going to work for your situation.
No, I don't think it's going to work for your situation. I don't know. And maybe it could. I'd have to think about that. I got to think about it a little bit because I got to look at mine. And maybe you and I need to talk about, look at mine and see if we can't alter that to fit into yours.
And guys, this is great that I've sort of like made this a big deal here on this live stream, because you know, in the course of a week, I might get 1,000 views, and there might be 1 out of 1,000 of you guys like, Darren, this is how you do it. And I if somebody teaches me something, man, I'm like, I got to send this guy a reward. I'm going to give you a free something, free pizza or something, right?
You know, I can't tell you how many times. So I worked full time when I was teaching in the college there. I worked full time as a developer, and I would do a lot of work like with engineering, and there was sometimes I couldn't figure out how to solve a problem. I was lost. I would just get lost. So I would put it out there as an assignment for you guys wouldn't even know. You guys are doing a lab, and there's this little feature in this lab, and you guys would come up with a solution for me half the time. And it was like, oh, this is how you do it. So it's great to do that, man. You know, it's like it works.
So to answer my own question of what I currently know, what I would do, take out this if, is I won't patch any of this here. So I'll cut that out. And I will have an if for each of those 4. It just makes me a little sad that that's the way I have to do it. It makes me feel like it's really an efficient way of doing that, you know. Because we could end up having
PowerApps doesn't allow you. They do really well dealing with record level conditions, but they don't do very well going across the fields of your record. You know, it would be great if PowerApps could get better at the conditional placement of things within the fields of a record, you know. But we can't. It's hard to do things on the fly at the record level there like that.
Now, I will go against this almost in a reverse way to capture some of this. And that will be, I'll say if, okay, we'll go look at this drop-down list. So this is the application. It's the last of the cascading of the 4. I want to say, selected text dot value. Okay. And I'm going to check to see, now that's going to be a number. Check the length of that. And if that's greater than 0, then I know that I want to do a patch. In fact, I just want to do what I do right there. Paste that here. Okay. Now I know it's always going to be an existing record. So right up here, when we patched it, you guys realize when you do a patch, the patch function returns the record that it just patched. So we've got a good reference to the record right there. So I'm going to use that right here. It's not even going to check that stuff. Boom. It's a record. Okay. That's the record that we just patched. And at this point, what we can do is we can update. If they've selected the application ID, then I know, okay, it's right here. Dot selected. That ID. Now, it doesn't like something about this. Let's hover over the red squiggly patch. It has some invalid arguments, okay? Well, we got patch. There's the requirement. There's the record. Am I doing something wrong here, guys?
Yeah, can we see what the error is saying?
Patch has some invalid arguments. So typically you want to check your commas. What am I missing here? In some cases, PowerApps will give you an error, and it's like a phantom error. If you were to get out of the application and come back, sometimes it's like, oh, there's no problem. You know, but you guys don't see anything wrong with this so far, right?
Not yet. I'm not seeing that.
Oh, no.
No, it looks really good. I like it. Unless LOC record is bogus.
No.
Yeah, LOC
You got-
record.
Your second record, you got an update. Your second parameter of your patch is an LOC record, which is the same thing that you got going into the first one.
Mhm.
If your LOC record is okay, then it should be okay.
Oh. Oh, AppGuid does not exist. AppGuid? Have you seen AppGuid here?
Specified.
Oh, it's got some problems
Wow.
down here.
Oh, okay.
Let me comment all this stuff out here. Maybe that's part of the problem. It doesn't take much to confuse PowerApps, right? Now it doesn't have a problem at all.
It doesn't take me much to confuse me either, so I don't blame PowerApps at all for that.
We figured it out. All right, so we got environment. So if they select an application ID, these are all cascading. So the environment ID should be right on. So we got that. I feel like you guys are learning something. Hopefully everybody is. And then we've got tenant ID. And then we also have org ID. Hey, Kurt, you have an eye on the chat. Is there anything interesting going on in the chat that we should probably be addressing?
I think we pretty much. I think we've talked about all that. Everything
Yeah, I
is
just
in
want to
there.
make sure that we're keeping up to date with some focus on coding here. So now I'm going to check to see.
Yeah, Brett and Cheese talked about that when we were going through our thing. He was talking about they were talking about maybe patch an empty row for the record, and default value for your fields are always null. That's kind of what we were trying to address. That's what I was trying to. That was my original thing, and it's not quite going to work that way.
Yeah. You know, something I've done in the past sometimes is, instead of, because I don't have a way of putting null in a database column, is I'll just put a 0 there. So if they don't have something there, I don't have an ID, I was like, okay, put a 0 in there, because it's numeric type, but it just makes me feel like it's cheesy. You know what I mean? Like it's,
Yeah.
they call that in the software development industry, you gotta stink, or you gotta smell. Your code smells. Have you ever heard that?
Mm-hmm.
You got some code smell in there. It smells like a Darren app. Or Kurt, sometimes you say, well, Darren, go on and put your stink on it. And I'm like, well, you put your stink on, I'll put my stink on it. And hopefully by the time we're done, we've got some cologne. And then we'll get Amber and Elvis to put their stink on it, and then we'll have perfume. What do you guys think?
Meow.
You're funny. All right, so app, we got environment ID.
That music, Jeopardy music. What do you call it? I'm having a hard time pronouncing it.
Elevator music.
Elevator music, yeah.
Jeopardy music.
I'm thinking more like FX music, like when you have the an anvil falling on the coyote in the, remember the old, you have the, I'm thinking that kind of music.
There's the moment in coding when you have to put on the hoodie, grab a Red Bull can, and just be into it.
Grab yourself a Snickers bar and a Mountain Dew or a Red Bull, and put your hoodie on, though.
And lower the lights in your room, make it dim.
You guys have no idea. Oh my goodness. I used to have some rituals in there when I got going. I had rules. I could never shave. I could never clean my desk. I could never, I mean, it was just sloppy, ugly, messy, man, until my program got done. And sometimes it would take 3 to 6 months, and it would just be gnarly in there. It'd just be terrible.
Gnarly. What does gnarly mean?
It's just stuff that was just ugly. I had things growing. It was terrible. Yeah. Back to reality. Oops, there goes gravity.
No, that's either hacker Kurt or that's cold Kurt.
Eminem's grandfather, Kurt.
All right, so I checked to see if they've got something on the application selected, and if they do, I plug in all 4, because I know all 4 have been done up there. Then I check to see on the else block, okay, well, what about the environment? And I know in this case, the application ID was not selected because we went into a false block here. Okay, so we saved those 3. And then we should have an else block here. What do you guys think of my code? And then we check the tenant ID. If the tenant ID was provided, then we're going to save the tenant in the org. Otherwise, if I paste that properly there. The things you have to do sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't have a null. We don't provide the tenant. Okay, so with org ID, tenant ID, org ID, the 3, and then the 4. So I'm hoping this is going to handle all these different situations. So I got a question. for Amber, and I want you to think about this question before you answer it, right? Are you getting anything out of the accelerator program?
I got stuck and I didn't know how to do it. And I was like, oh my God, this is so frustrating. I don't understand anything. And I did not have anybody to talk PowerApps. And then I went on YouTube and then I found your videos. You gained my interest the way you were teaching it. And then little by little, I started learning. And then after that, I remember that I texted you, hey, can you help me? Can you help make a patch video? I'm having a trouble with that. And then you made a patch video. And then after that, I came across, I started learning. I did the lab 1. And then I felt confident on myself. I'm like, now I can take projects. And then the first thing that came to my mind, I was like, I still need to complete the application that I was building like way back. So what about I go back and make the application again from the scratch? And now when I was doing it, I completed the application in 3 days. I was like, boom, everything. I was understanding everything. And I completed the application.
It's all easy, right? Because now you understand it.
It's all easy. And then I realized the way you taught me, I realized how many mistakes these guys were making while giving the instructions. When you're coding and when you're actually a beginner, and when you're a beginner, you just try to copy everything, type everything as it is, as they say. But now I realized why the code wasn't working, because these guys in the ERD, they gave a different name. And when they were giving the code, they had a different name for those columns and fields. And
that's great to hear. I appreciate that.
I'm so happy about it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your experience there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Darren and Kurt and everybody in the school environment. Like, it's a very supportive place, safe place for learning, and you don't get judged by your level of learning.
That's right. You should always compare yourself with yourself from yesterday. Are you making progress? Because if you ever compare yourself to somebody else, somebody else might, maybe they've been in the program or they've been a programmer for a few years. You can't compare your beginning with somebody else's middle or end. Otherwise, you're just going to be frustrated all the time. So always compare yourself with yourself.
Yes. Yeah. And definitely one more thing, your courses and your way of teaching did lower my learning curve 2x or 3x, I would say.
That's great. That's great to hear. Thank you so much for sharing that. That makes my day. That was a great response. Thought out response, Amber. Oh, he's got his hoodie on. Very cool. So I've been hitting save. I've been going through here and testing out my code. Looks like we got some requirements. Isn't this cool? So all our efforts are sort of paying off here. So for this, let's say test 1, 2, 3. I go in here and select. Let's select an org here. Let's say Neese tenant. Let's go ahead and say PowerApps environment. Oh, Kurt has a test sandbox, and the application Kurt's worst app he's ever written. Okay, let's see about that. We'll hit save. Okay, what happened here? Now, whenever you're writing an app and the values didn't get selected here, were they saved? Well, you should probably go over to your data first. What's that?
Did you save it to the same record? Did you change the title of it?
Yeah, let's see what we got here. So on this test 1, 2, 3, I'm going to zoom in here so you guys can see it. SQL for Management Studio doesn't really allow me to zoom in by itself very well here. So we do have is active org ID 10 ID environment. So it did save it. And then why isn't it being displayed properly? Now, were you giving me a hint? I think, Amber, you were saying something while I was looking at this.
I was saying, did you write it to the same record? Did you update the same record? That's what I was saying.
Yeah, so let's go into the patch statement and actually look at the code again. So we patch it once with these 3 values, and we get this variable, local variable. And then down below, Okay, as long as that's provided, then we're going to patch the 4 of these. So we've got a good record here. That's the record that we patched. And we patch it, then we throw it back into the same variable. Okay, so it looks like it did. I think what's going on, because we just looked at the data, and it looks like those 4 IDs were set properly, but why aren't they being brought up? So if we look at the default value, it's looking at this gallery, selected, org ID. Okay, what about the tenant ID? Is that set up right? Tenant ID. I'm expecting this to work, and it's not. So what exactly is going on here? Application ID. Now look at that. It says 3. You know what? How a drop-down list works, the default is going to select the text that we have here. We don't have a bunch of numbers in these drop-downs, right? It actually has text. So we need to go find that text. Okay, so for the default, we actually need to do lookups.
Or go find the
Does that
ID.
make sense?
Can't you do a selected dot the ID? Go ahead.
Selected dot like that right there.
Yeah.
So that's going to give us the underlying record of the gallery on the left side. And that gallery are the requirements, the requirements table. So we've got a record. When we say .select, that's the selected record of the requirements database table. And we can get at the organization ID, but what we need there is the organization name. We need to match up the org name to all the names in that dropdown. That's really what we need to do. We don't have a bunch of IDs in the
Okay,
dropdown.
so you're going over to another table to look it up. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, that.
Now, if we had Dataverse, we could do some cool stuff, maybe, right? Because it has some additional features sort of in there where you can, get at things. But all right, so we'll say org ID. Okay, so let's do a lookup over on the org table, organization table. Okay, and we need to go match up the ID with that. Okay, now at this point, this lookup's going to give us a record, but what we need is a text value. What's the text value? Probably the name. Oh, look at that. Okay, very good.
Yeah, this lookup gives me so much satisfaction for some reason.
What's that?
The lookup gives me so much satisfaction.
And when you write your own lookups, do you feel just as satisfied?
Yes, I'm like, yes. That's exactly what I want to get.
I don't get complete satisfaction until I hit that little format text at the bottom and it breaks it up into 5
Oh,
lines.
yeah, true.
And I'm looking at Kurt's face. It's like, no, that'll all fit on 1 line, Darren. Right? All right, so let's do a lookup here. Let's open up the coding window. Okay. And make sure we're keeping up with all the chats here. Yeah. So Carl said he sort of identifies with Amber there. I'm from Chile. Subscribed to the channel like 2 weeks ago and have had the same experience of Amber. But nobody talks about PowerApps, and I found this channel. It's helping a lot. Well, that's awesome to hear, Carl. Thanks for saying that. Yeah. How do I get Darren as my co-pilot? Well, you sign up for the accelerator. So the question is, are you guys a part of the free community? I run a free community out there, and you can learn more about the accelerator there. I've got links at the very top. So there's a platform called school.com, SKOOL.com. And so I pay let me check on something here. Well, nope, the wife hung up. Check and see if that was an emergency, but maybe not. I have a free community out there. I pay $100 a month to have a place for you guys to ask questions, and people can answer your questions. And sometimes me and Kurt are in there. We'll answer your questions. What I found is on YouTube channel, the comments just aren't a great place to answer questions because you can't post your screenshots. And so the school environment gives us a lot more flexibility in helping people. So that would be a good starting point. Get into the Power Platform community I've created there, and then interact with us there. You actually get free access to all my stuff based on the level that you get. there. So there's there's actually 3 posts at the top of the community tab. One of them actually explains how to get anything for free, and that's just to sort of move up in the community, be active in the community. Every time somebody likes a comment or a post that you post there, you'll get points, and then you'll move up to different levels. And I have everything mapped out with like belts out of a martial art. You know, you start off as a white belt. If you make it all the way to black belt, you get my the accelerator program for free. Now that will take you quite a while to get there, but along the way, immediately you'll get my crash course for free. And I think by blue belt or green belt, you get my my jumpstart kit, and along the way you'll get my ticketing system course for free. So just sort of keep that in mind. Of course, you can purchase each of those things individually if you want to save time. So you have a lot of different options. I wanted to provide different options for people's different situations. So we'll need to finish up this lookup. So we're going to the data source that we need to look up here. This would be after the organization. This would be the tenant. So we'll say tenant, and here we'll say the ID equals that, and we'll say name. Okay, and does that bring it up? And it did. Okay, so we'll do the same thing for environment here. So I got up there. Now we do need our commas in there. Commas are very important. Now be thinking about what I'm going to ask you guys here in a moment is, what else do we need to add to this screen after we get all this working? There. All right. So now if I click on 1, 2, 3, I need to change this, and I'll say just tied to one org. Okay. I'll move this around so you guys can see this a little better. And I'm not going to select anything for these three, just this one. I'm going to hit save. Okay. And I click on a different one. I come back and it only has that one selected. I like that. Now this filtering up here isn't quite wired up to filter this. So that's something that we need to do. Is there anything else? Kurt, what do you think? Is there anything that you would expect that you'd want to do to the screen before we say, hey, tell your stakeholders, your project manager, your scrum master, your boss, hey, that screen's done. Is there anything that we should add to this?
I mean, I can't think of anything else right now.
Let's take a look at our delete. What exactly is going on here with this delete? Okay, so we've got a container here. Here's a question for you, Kurt.
Let's see. So why, in my case, I have used something to use semicolon and not just comma to separate the values in the functions. I have to use a semicolon and not just a comma to separate the values in the functions. So the semicolon is the end of a line. So if you have multiple, or the end of a command. So if you have multiple commands on a line, you have to have a semicolon.
And that has to do with the syntax, which is the rules of a language. So PowerFX is the language for PowerApps, right? I was thinking back, if you knew in Pascal. In Pascal, did you separate parameters with semicolons or
not parameters, lines? It's very similar to
like C.
Very similar to what we do here in PowerApps. A semicolon is the end of a command. So you can have many commands on one line. So a semicolon is the separation between commands. You could put all those commands in PowerApps. You could put 3 or 4 commands on one line, and the semicolon is what does that. That separates that.
Yeah.
And parameters and functions, it's the comma. So you're somebody out there in the deep dark recesses created a function out there and put it in PowerApps. Maybe let's just use the patch function. Somebody created a patch function, and when they created that patch function, they said, okay, we're going to create 3 parameters. There's going to be 3 inputs coming in so that we can process this function. This function can accommodate any kind of record. We're going to either add a record or we're going to edit a record, and it can accommodate anything. But we need those 3 inputs to do that. And the first parameter has got to be the data source, and then you have a comma that separates the first one from the second one. And then the second one is going to be the record source, and then you need another comma to separate the second one from the third one. So it's going to need 3 commas. And in fact, if you just put an empty patch statement up there and you put a comma in there, you're going to actually see that IntelliSense is going to show you which parameter you're on. So that's how the commas is how functions and procedures keep track of what parameters are coming in. You know, it separates that. Whereas a semicolon.
Go ahead. But I was saying commas are used within a function, and semicolons are used in between functions, different functions.
Yeah. And actually you can also, commas are used elsewhere too. Like when you're dealing with lists, when you're dealing with a parameterized list, like say an array, if you're creating an array. Since we're talking about arrays earlier, do you know how do you create an array? What delineates an array?
Collection as something symbol? That comes first to my mind. Creating an array is a collection.
So you know how you delineate a record is with the curly brackets, right?
Yes.
So what delineates an array if it's not curly brackets?
Yeah. The square brackets?
Square brackets, exactly right.
Gotcha.
So if you see the square brackets in there. Okay, so you have a comma list inside of those square brackets as well.
Yes.
There's probably other places that you could use commas in too, maybe. I got to think though.
So I just brought over a drop-down list. I want to give people an example of what you're talking about because it's a very good point, Kurt. So we got a drop-down. We're going to provide all of the values that we want in here. In order to create a list, you said square brackets, right?
Yeah.
So I could say in here for this drop-down, I could have a yes, no, and a maybe, right? Is that sort of what you were talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Create a list with those square brackets, and what we're doing is we're utilizing commas here. Now these aren't parameters, but they could be, you know.
Right. I guess it's a parameter for the array, the lists, right? So Carl just brought it up in the chat. He brought his situation up. He's dealing with a form, and he's got 2 semicolons up there next to a patch. Don't know. Of course, I don't mess with forms, so I don't know. Maybe there's some special syntax for forms.
Okay. Yeah. New form. Yeah, that would be the name of the form. That's a long form name. And I would take out repeating semicolons. You got 2 semicolons. I would take one of those out. Then you would patch, do a lookup.
That semicolon should not work.
Yeah, it should be a comma after the lookup.
It should be a comma.
Yeah. Now I think Carl's is with using a different language. So if I had a PowerApps, I think maybe in Germany and other languages.
Yep.
And you know how in English we've got a comma, like for 1,000 we say 1,000. Over there, I think they use semicolons.
Yeah, right? I think you're right. I've seen that before too. Now that you said that.
Yeah.
I tell you what, I'm losing my touch. I should have caught that right away.
So the syntax of the language can change based on the language of the region that you're in. So just keep that in mind.
Working in Spanish, maybe the language, maybe so, Carl. Maybe Espanol needs some kind of other deal.
Wow.
I should have caught that, Carl. I should have caught that already right away. I knew that.
All right, I'm going to move this thing all the way up to the top. So the Z order, I wish we could control the Z order programmatically or declaratively. Don't you, Kurt?
I do.
That'd be nice, huh? Okay. Make sure that we had this thing. Sure you want to delete that? Yeah. Cancel that. Okay, so this is looking pretty nice. Now, what I would want to do is I'd want to get this filtering working just right up here. So what I would want to do, let's actually name these drop down lists properly. So we got drop organization filter 1. Okay. I might put something in here like requirement instead of _1. Okay, so I'll go here. Tenant filter for the requirement, environment filter, and application. Okay, so what we'll do is I'll grab the name of that one, and then we'll open up this for this filtering here. What we'll say is actually, this is probably pretty close to what we need here. The organization ID, if it equals what was selected for the org dropdown, or if it's blank. Okay. But now we need to add on the other 3. So I'm going to copy this. Whoops. And we'll say and. And what I like to do, just to make sure everything's nice and clear, is I like to use parentheses to make sure the order of precedence is actually respected here. So it's either this or this, and that will come up with the true or false, and then we'll do an and down here. And I want these two to be evaluated together. Okay, so any type of programming software development, you've got order of precedence, the order of operations, and you can force the order of operations or the order of precedence with these parentheses. Okay, so the next thing after the organization would be the tenant ID, but for some reason I always put another T in there, a tenant ID. Okay. And let's go grab that guy right there. Now, when I first started off with PowerApps, I would have so many if then else statements here for all the different combinations of things that were picked in the filters. And I've sort of, learned this way of doing it, right? So we check to see if the tenant lines up with this one, okay, or it's blank, okay. And then we could copy this stuff here. Say and. Okay. And then we've got the environment ID.
I got another question about your empty fields over there, where if you have empty drop downs to where you want to be able to do it for all. Now,
okay.
I'm still, so are you going to be, is it always going to be all of them are going to be empty if any of them are going to be empty?
Because they cascade, if one of them is selected, I know the rest of the 3 are selected. Does that make sense? Or is that related to what you're asking?
Well, you're over here cascading, right? You're over here working on a search right now, and I'm still back over here where you were at earlier today, where you were doing the update, and you wanted to have it null, leave it null if
right.
you weren't updating. And I was just wondering if you were, if those things are all empty, couldn't you just have like a toggle button to say make it global for everything, like you want it to be all, like you're all?
Make it global for everything.
So if you wanted to leave all of your drop downs empty so that you don't update you want to leave null values in there.
Right.
If you wanted it to be like a requirement across all the board, could you, as a workaround, could you do a toggle on that and say just have a global all for your all?
So, so we would add a toggle here, and the toggle would say what? Like provide?
It would be for like all. Instead of having your all in your drop down list boxes, it would be an all for the toggle. Is what I was.
Oh, like you want this to apply to everything.
Right.
By default, that's what you get. It does apply to everything. And maybe we should communicate that to the user. Like, hey, this is optional. If you leave this blank, it's going to apply to all of them. But you're thinking of like taking it one step farther and just having a toggle, and then it would just sort of gray the 4 of them out.
That's what I was wondering. Just so you didn't have to do all that conditional stuff in there. I'm still trying to figure out how to do that. Yeah.
Well, what if they want to specify the organization? Like, I want this requirement to be for this, but not these 3.
That's what
Are we going to put in another toggle for that?
I mean, we could.
These are great questions.
Now that you just said that, you could put a small toggle next to organization and next to tenant and next to environment to have for all to delineate all. You could do that.
I think at that point, if I really wanted to say that, I would add an item and I'd have at the very top with parentheses like applies to all.
Well, and that's what that's what I was saying originally, and you didn't want to do that. So I'm just trying to find another workaround. I
do like that option over bringing over another control and checking for another value. Is just have like all applies to all organizations, applies to all tenants.
Yeah.
But I think that we would still have to check, and then also think about this: would we still just with the code for our save button? Would it still be the same? Or would it be saving a 0 now? Will it be putting a -1 in that? Because if you look at our schema over here, we've got these 4 columns here. What do we put in these 4 things if they apply to all?
Yeah, the best way to do it is just keep them empty, like you say. And the reason why I asked that, and I didn't mean to take you away from that. I guess I was hoping that you could just answer it. Is if you were going to do it blanketly, a simple toggle would be great. If you're going to do it for all of them, in other words, you weren't going to have one organization and not the tenant. If everything was going to be empty, you could do a toggle. But if you're going to have stuff in between there, it doesn't make sense to do that.
But these are good questions, Kurt, and it's something that I think that when you're building an app, you need to be asking all these questions. Like what. There might be a situation where you might want to do that. It makes sense. So,
yeah. Absolutely. Onward, back to the show here. Okay, back to what you were doing.
Yeah. Okay. Because I haven't selected anything, it's gonna show me everything. Okay. Mm-hmm. But if I said now, if I click on this has to do with Neese. Let me save that. And I click on down here. And it's got all 4 of them selected. Let me go up to this first one and make this a part of a different organization. Let's make this Kurt LLC. Save that one. Okay. So now if I say Kurt LLC, I should only see 1. That works. What if I said Neese LLC? I only see the ones but if I say, I don't care, I want to see them all. Boom. Then I see them all. What do you guys think? Now, does that leave us at a good spot? Are you ready to turn this over to the project manager, the scrum master, your boss, the users, stakeholders, and say, okay, I'm done with the screen? Of course, we probably want to do some testing of our own here, right? But what else should be added to this before we turn it over?
You know what we should have done, Darren?
What should we have done?
Oh my goodness! I just had the greatest idea in the world. We should have created an Azure DevOps board for this. and we should have created stories for it. And then we could have been going up against the stories to make sure, have we done this? Is this finished? Is this correct? And we could have moved it along the process. And then we could have done some testing and moved it along the process. Oh, that would have been awesome, because there's so much value in that. People out there, I know that a lot of you guys out there are looking at SQL Server, but if you're dealing with SQL Server, oftentimes you're going to be dealing with corporations, and oftentimes you need to learn how to do that kind of stuff, you know?
Absolutely. So every place that I've been in the last few years, put it that way, they have some type of a board. They all use Azure, not Azure, Agile. And I remember FDOT, they use an Azure DevOps board. Another place, sometimes they use ServiceNow, or there's some type of system everybody uses for these boards. So it's something, if you want to be well-rounded, it's something that we teach our accelerator students to manage projects. And
it puts us, the developer, because right now it's our project, so it's done when we say it's done, okay? But it puts a limit to us and said, okay, what were we planning on doing with this project? Now we've got something that we could go up against with the requirements and say, okay, did we follow the requirements? Is this done? Or do we have a whole lot of stuff in there that doesn't matter? We could be checking into that. That's a great, boy, I tell you what, we should.
Well, Rick has a suggestion. Let's go ahead and restart the live stream, and I'll delete this screen real quick, and we'll actually redo this with the.
Do you want to save a copy?
I will kill you.
Do you want?
I think Amber's like, hey man, save it. Save it.
Save a copy.
Save it, man. Save it.
We did a lot of work there. You can't just delete it.
But there's no reason why we couldn't put that on hold if you guys wanted to. We could put this, okay, we stop right here and we go back, because look, we're still in the baby stages of this program. We've got an ERD, which should have been an Azure story. The ERD should have been 1 or 2 Azure stories,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, Rick says he means for the last 2 months. So let's start from the very beginning of the project. Okay.
That's kind of what I was saying. We could put this on hold and go back and do that.
Or we could, like, from here on out, every new screen, we could start with a user story, and we'll sort of cover a little bit of each user story. It's like, okay, so this video we're going to complete this user story. That's sort of cool. Absolutely.
So what we'll do next week then is we'll create a couple of user stories. We'll create an Azure board, set it up, and we'll create some user stories for the next screens.
I like it. Picasso.
You know what? That was pretty. That was pretty genius. And I mean, I think that constitutes an increase in responsibility. That constitutes an increase of compensation.
Guys, when he says increase responsibility, he's asking for a raise. Just
putting that out there. No, I'm messing with you, man. No, it's just fun. It's just fun.
Well, I think the biggest question that should be in each of your minds watching this is, what should you watch next? Guys, for some reason, YouTube thinks you're going to like this video next. Let's see if they're right. Or you can select this playlist, which I've selected for you based on the content you're currently watching. Guys, got to hurry. Click one of them. Otherwise, YouTube's going to autoplay some other video.